In the United States, an 18-year-old is legally barred from renting a car or buying a bottle of wine, yet the system actively encourages them to sign a contract that can consume 30 years of their life. We're told that education is a ladder, but for millions, it has been recalibrated into a debt-fueled entry ticket to a promised decline. This is the educational paradox. A generation was pushed into a system of urgency and social validation, only to find that the American dream they were promised was actually a structural trap designed to harvest their future earnings. The math behind this disconnect is staggering, as the cost of tuition has outpaced general inflation by over 1,200%, leaving graduates with stagnant salaries that simply cannot keep up with rising interest rates and an explosive cost of living. You feel a sense of abandonment because the system was built to benefit financial institutions rather than students, creating a reality where the price tag no longer reflects the economic value of the degree. This is not an individual mistake. It is a structural failure where the primary output of the university is no longer knowledge, but an escapable debt. Signing those papers isn't just a financial decision. It's an event that neuroscience shows a young adult isn't fully equipped to grasp in terms of long-term psychological impact. What started with the Higher Education Act of 1965 as a genuine effort to expand opportunity has been transformed into a monopoly on professional life. We must validate the frustration of those who followed every rule, only to realize that the ladder they were climbing was leaning against a wall of structural corruption and predatory incentives.
The true driver of this crisis is found within the institutional incentive structure, where the hidden cause of skyrocketing tuition is a system where colleges face no risk when students default. Because the federal government guarantees these loans, universities are encouraged to engage in excessive spending on administrative bloat and luxury campuses, passing every cent of that cost on to the student. This has created a model where the price of education is no longer tied to the quality of instruction, but to the maximum amount of debt a student is allowed to carry. We must also investigate the structural corruption of the 2005 legislation that specifically removed bankruptcy protections for student loans, creating a unique class of inescapable debt that haunts families for a lifetime. This legal wall turned student loans into the most predatory financial product on the market, as they are the only type of consumer debt that cannot be discharged through traditional means. It effectively created a supply chain of debt where loan servicers are incentivized to keep borrowers in interest-only payment cycles, maximizing corporate profit while the principal balance remains frozen or even grows. This has led to a credentialing arms race and market capture, where corporations and government agencies have created an artificial dependency on degrees for entry-level jobs. Citizens are forced into high-interest loans just to compete in a declining market, even when the actual work does not require 4 years of academic study. When you compare the return on investment of a degree today versus the 1970s, you see a collapsed model where the price tag no longer reflects the human consequence or the true economic value of the labor.
The term good debt acts as a profound manipulation tactic designed to lower your cognitive barriers, making a predatory financial product feel like a responsible life choice. By framing student loans as an investment in yourself, the system bypasses your natural defenses against high-interest borrowing. This creates a cognitive trap where the borrower believes they are building a future while they are actually signing up for a lifetime of wealth extraction. This illusion is reinforced by a social stigma mechanism, where the shame and exhaustion felt by those who cannot pay are used as a control mechanism. Instead of directly projecting their indignation at the lending structure, borrowers are conditioned to blame themselves for their choice of major or their inability to outrun the interest. This psychological pressure effectively silences collective dissent, ensuring that the student loan crisis remains a series of private tragedies rather than a public uprising against a failed model. The real-world impact of this debt acts as a silent crisis, delaying fundamental life milestones like marriage, homeownership, and family formation. This isn't just a personal delay, it is effectively stalling the future of the country by freezing the economic mobility of its most educated citizens. While the media occasionally highlights success story outliers to create a false sense of security, the macro vision reveals millions of graduates struggling with poverty-level wages, trapped by a mental model of enslavement that stifles innovation and forces them into unfulfilling jobs just to satisfy the interest. The American debt model is a global anomaly that reveals the crisis is a policy choice, not an economic necessity. When we compare the United States to European or Asian systems, where higher education is treated as essential public infrastructure, the contrast is sharp and revealing. In those nations, the goal is to produce economically free citizens who can innovate and contribute to society immediately. In the U.S., the goal has shifted towards creating perpetual borrowers. This international contrast exposes the American system as a specialized machine for profit, where the desire for intellectual growth is met with a sentence of financial instability. This high cost of education is causing a brain drain and a crisis of exported talent, as professionals are forced into sectors that serve the debt machine rather than human impact. Doctors, engineers, and teachers often choose their career paths based on the size of the paycheck needed to service their loans, rather than where their skills are most needed. We are witnessing the profitability of failure, where monopolistic lenders and institutions thrive on a system that keeps the population in a state of constant financial dependency. It is a model that prioritizes the stability of the creditor over the health of the national economy. Furthermore, we see the structural fraud inherent in for-profit colleges, which use hidden patterns of predatory marketing to target the most vulnerable populations, including veterans and low-income students. They promise miraculous solutions and career transformations that lead only to ruined credit and useless credentials. This happens within a regulatory vacuum, where government oversight fails to protect the consumer from misleading interest calculations and aggressive collection tactics. The system is designed to prioritize corporate incentives, leaving the individual to navigate a dangerous landscape of misleading promises and permanent debt.
The $1.7 trillion ticking clock is no longer a distant warning. It is a macro explanation of how a massive bubble of uncollectible debt now threatens the stability of the entire national financial system. This is the invisible inflation of education, a paradox that almost nobody in power comments on. The very government-backed loans intended to make college accessible are the primary fuel for the rise in prices. By flooding the market with easy credit that can never be discharged, the government created a feedback loop where universities can raise tuition indefinitely, knowing the taxpayer and the student will always be forced to bridge the gap. The human consequence of default reveals the limitless reach of this trap, with growing reports of seniors having their Social Security garnished to pay back student loans they took out decades ago. It is a haunting image that shatters the myth of the temporary struggle, showing that this system is designed to follow you into the grave. These are the subtle signs of systemic failure, a reality where the debt outlives the career it was supposed to build. It reveals a connection between government and private lenders that ensures the system is built to benefit a few at the expense of the many, transforming citizens into permanent line items on a corporate balance sheet. This rupture is already becoming becoming visible as younger generations begin to refuse enrollment in expensive colleges, recognizing the first sign of a major breakdown in the traditional educational model. They are looking at the math and realizing that the risk no longer justifies the reward. This refusal is a rational response to an irrational system, a signal that the monopoly on the American dream is starting to crack. When the cost of the entry ticket exceeds the lifetime value of the destination, the only logical move for the consumer is to stop playing the game entirely.
Reclaiming our future requires moving beyond the magic solution of loan forgiveness, which is often presented as a cure-all but fails to address the root cause of this failed model. True systemic change doesn't start with a government check. It starts with acknowledging that the student loan crisis is not an individual mistake, but a structural pattern of exploitation. We must validate your perception of deception. You are right to feel that the system was designed to be incoherent and exhausting, as it prioritizes the stability of the debt machine over the prosperity of the citizen. Understanding this systemic takeaway is the only way to break the cycle of misleading incentives that has defined the American educational experience for decades. We are seeing an alternative perspective emerge, where the value of technical skills, trade schools, and the decentralization of knowledge is beginning to break the monopoly of the traditional degree. This shift isn't just about saving money, it's about reclaiming the right to an education that doesn't demand your financial freedom as collateral. In this final reflection, we must realize that revealing the mechanisms of the trap is the only way to build a future where intellectual growth is not a sentence to financial instability. The $1.7 trillion scam thrives on the silence and the shame of those it ensnares, but its power fades the moment we understand the structural reality behind the signature. By choosing clarity over convenience and transparency over tradition, we can begin to dismantle the debt-based gatekeeping of the American dream and reclaim a future that belongs to the people, not the lenders.